Welcome back to our special coverage of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. With promises to revitalize manufacturing, impose higher tariffs, and reduce regulations, his economic agenda is posed to reshape U.S. policy. Today, we delve into the potential impacts of his policies on both U.S. and global markets, examining the challenges and opportunities ahead. Stay with us on Qnews as we navigate the economic future under President Trump. A survey by the American Chamber of Commerce to the EU shows that 9 out of 10 U.S. companies in Europe expect worsening transatlantic economic relations, with Trump's expected tariffs as the main concern. A survey of 58 U.S.-controlled companies found that 66% accept negative impacts from United States policies, while 52% anticipate a negative impact and effect from EU policies. Key priorities for transatlantic cooperation include trade policy, supply chain resilience, and the energy transition. Despite Trump's planned withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, 75% of firms are supportive and call for reduced trade barriers and strong regulatory cooperation between the EU and United States. An incoming Trump administration official has said that President-elect Donald Trump will release a trade memo on Monday, halting short of imposing new tariffs on his first day in office. The memo will direct federal agencies to evaluate U.S. trade relationships with China, Canada, and Mexico. Trump has previously pledged tariffs of 10% on global imports, 60% on Chinese goods, and a 25% surcharge on Canadian and Mexican products. The memo will also focus on addressing trade deficits and unfair trade and currency practices, especially with China, Canada, and Mexico. It will also call for an assessment of Beijing's compliance with the 2020 U.S.-China trade deal and the status of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement.
Thank you. And we will fight, and we will win. To the United States of America, you look at Venezuela, they've emptied their prisons, and we will make America great again.
And as Donald Trump prepares for his second term, his economic vision seeks to reshape America's financial and industrial landscape, from reviving traditional manufacturing and imposing higher import tariffs to reducing regulations. Trump's agenda outlines bold initiatives to boost domestic production. He has pledged to end inflation and make America's affordable again, with a focus on increased oil drilling to lower energy costs. However, his own policies, stiff tariffs, and tax strategies have sparked significant debate, raising concerns about potential impacts on inflation, labor markets, and international trade relations. His proposals include tax break for small businesses, substantial corporate tax cuts, and even plans to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. As Donald Trump prepares for his second term, his economic plan is a priority to revive traditional manufacturing, reducing regulations, and imposing higher import tariffs to boost domestic production. Trump's economic agenda envisions a resurgence in manufacturing through reduced regulations and protectionism. Trump has also vowed to end inflation and make America affordable again. He believes that increasing oil drilling will lower energy costs and has pledged to bring down interest rates, though is beyond the president's control, or rather is beyond the president's control.
As Donald Trump prepares for his second term, his economic plan prioritizes reviving traditional manufacturing, reducing regulations and imposing higher import tariffs to boost domestic production. Trump's economic agenda envisions a resurgence in manufacturing through reduced regulations and protectionism. Trump has vowed to end inflation and make America affordable again. He believes that increasing oil drilling will lower energy costs and has pledged to bring down interest rates, though this is beyond the president's control. Goldman Sachs estimates that a 10 to 20% tariff on most imports could ultimately drive up core inflation. Trump argues that deporting undocumented immigrants would reduce housing demand, though economists warn that import taxes and labor shortages could fuel inflation. Deporting 1.3 million workers could increase inflation by 1.3%, while removing 7.5 million could shrink GDP by up to 12%, potentially causing an economic shock. Trump, who favors protectionist policies, proposes a 10 to 20% tariffs on most imports, with even higher rates on Chinese goods. He prefers bilateral deals and has promised tax incentives for domestic manufacturing. He has promised to impose steep tariffs, starting with a 60% rate on Chinese goods, with an additional 10% set to follow. On his first day in office, he intends to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, while European allies will face a 10% tariff on all global imports. He has warned the EU of severe consequences for not increasing US exports and threatened further penalties, particularly in the energy sector, if Europe does not purchase more US oil and gas. Trump plans tax breaks for small businesses to boost job creation without federal wage mandates. He will target traditional manufacturing and energy sectors for rapid job growth. Trump suggests deep tax cuts, including a corporate tax reduction to 15% and an extension of his 2017 tax cuts. He argues that growth and tariffs will fund these cuts. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model, Trump's proposed tax cuts and tariff strategies could increase the budget deficit by $5.8 trillion over the next decade. In his second term, Trump aims to make cryptocurrency central to U.S. economic policy. His most controversial proposal is the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve in which the U.S. would purchase large quantities of Bitcoin to hold as a reserve, similar to its strategic petroleum reserve.
Joining us from Washington is American author and investment consultant Peter Qnews to discuss President-elect Donald Trump's economic agenda for his new term. Welcome to Q News, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you on a very historic day like today, sir. Sir, how feasible is Trump's goal of reviving traditional manufacturing through reduced regulations and protectionism?
Some of what he is proposing is going to be very popular. For example, deporting certain immigrants that are in the United States illegally. What he is going to do is start by deporting those that have criminal records. And nobody's going to object to that. On the other hand, as you've just mentioned, his plan to reduce inflation and make America more affordable, it goes completely against his plan to introduce tariffs of great magnitude, because those tariffs are by themselves inflationary. So that part doesn't make as much sense.
Sir, what challenges might arise from balancing higher tariffs with maintaining global trade relations?
Well, obviously, imposing tariffs broadly on everything we import is not exactly conducive to good trade relations. What it leads to is retaliation by your trade partners. So it's not likely, and interestingly enough, there have been a lot of leaks about the executive orders that Trump is going to impose about 1 hour from now after he is inaugurated. There is very little talk about the tariffs in these leaks of what he is going to do. There's a lot about immigration. There's a lot about other aspects of economic policy that he's going to impose right away. But I think the tariffs are going to be subject to a lot more negotiation than we've been told.
Sir, how might Trump's plans impact the United States' position in the global economy, especially with respect to allies and rivals? And are you optimistic, sir, or pessimistic about the Trump coming policies with regards, of course, to economics specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting that Trump has said that he wants to make America great again and bring America back. It's kind of interesting when the United States economy is today one of the most powerful in the world. Inflation has gone down, and the stock market is an all-time high. So he's pretty much starting at the top. It's not like we're starting at the bottom. Many of his policies are potentially harmful to the economy. And as I mentioned before,
Can you
a
mention
lot,
examples, sir, of the harmful potentials, please, or
sure,
policies?
sure. A 60% tariff on everything we import from China is a terrible idea because we import a $500 billion of goods from China every year. That obviously would be very inflationary. Imposing a 10 to 20% tariff on everything that comes in from everywhere else is obviously inflationary. And on top of that, would lead to retaliation by our trading partners, which would hurt American exporters. So obviously, these are not going to come to pass the way he said, and he knows that. He's simply lining up policies that will be subject to negotiations later on and hopefully not harmful.
Okay, Sir, Trump has pledged to end inflation, whereas you just said, of course, in your narrative that America, of course, has no inflation at this point. By increasing oil drilling, how effective is this strategy in reducing energy costs and overall inflation, sir?
Well, first of all, one of the things he's going to do today is remove restrictions on drilling in Alaska and elsewhere. That means that the United States, which is already the largest producer of oil in the world, is going to produce even more oil. So one can expect that the price of oil, at least temporarily, will come down. That, of course, has an anti-inflationary effect. But the other aspects, the ones we've already talked about, the higher tariffs, will certainly not contribute to reducing inflation. And keep in mind that inflation is not very high right now. It's under
Yes,
3%.
that's what she just mentioned, sir, and I commented on the fact that the inflation is not high in the United States at this point. Okay, sir, Trump also urges that deporting undocumented immigrants would reduce house demand. How might deporting millions of undocumented workers impact key sectors like agriculture, construction, and manufacturing, sir?
If he went through and deported all of them, say over 3 million, it would have a major effect on two areas, agriculture and building. Most of the skilled home building workers in the United States, many of them are illegal immigrants. This has already been documented. The housing industry would come to a halt if all of them were deported. So that's not what's going to happen right away. As I mentioned earlier, he's going to concentrate on deporting illegal immigrants with criminal records, which is hard to object to. Because we know who they are. Their countries of origin have provided us with the information. So that part will be okay. But he cannot deport massive amounts of immigrants without harming two major industries, which is agriculture and home building.
So your answer is yes or no, he can deport them or he cannot, sir?
They will not.
They will not
They
be deported.
will not
Okay, sir,
deport
as we
all.
witness the 47th President of the United States, which is Donald Trump, coming back again, more mature from, of course, what we read. Trump plans to cut corporate taxes to 15% and extend the 2017 tax cuts while funding these through growth and tariffs. How realistic is this funding model, sir?
Well, you can probably guess that leaving the tax cuts alone and not going back up again is going to be popular, obviously. And that is probably a good move. Yes, it will cost the Treasury some revenue, but it will certainly be very popular. The biggest problem we have on the economic side is the fact that the federal debt is now well over $35 trillion, and servicing that debt is costing over $1 trillion a year. So it is absolutely must come under control.
Mr. Peter Qnews, as you, of course, today we witness, of course, a historic day in the history of the United States. Are you optimistic, sir, before I wrap up?
Yes, I'm optimistic because I think that many of the Trump policies that he was talking about are merely preludes to negotiations, and that we will come out of this okay.
It's worth to mention, sir, that he is a person of negotiations. Thank you, Mr. Peter Qnews, for your valuable, informative economic insights, and thank you for joining us here on
Pleasure to be with you.
And we move on. Donald Trump's newly launched cryptocurrency, Trump dollar, surged on Monday, reaching a market value of $11.7 billion. The token, released on Friday, was trading at $58.56, with 24-hour trading volumes exceeding $52.5 billion, according to CoinMarketCap. It now ranks as the 18th largest cryptocurrency globally. Melania Trump also launched her own token on Sunday, valued at $12.03 with a $1.9 billion market cap. Bitcoin hit an all-time high of 109.071.86, buoyed by optimism surrounding Trump's presidency and his promises to reduce crypto regulations. The economic powers of the United States President are vast, yet carefully balanced within a system of checks and balances. While the president can shape budgets, trade policies, and economic initiatives, this authority is limited by the oversight of Congress and the judiciary and independent entities such as the Federal Reserve. Joining us from London is CEO of the Centre for Strategic Studies, Dr. Tariq Rifai, to discuss the economic authorities of the US president and his influence in decision makers at economic entities. Welcome, sir, to Q News, and it's a pleasure, of course, and a warm welcome to have you with us today on a very, of course, special historic day in the history of the United States. Sir, the United States president has significant influence over economic policies, but this power is balanced by checks. Can you elaborate more on how the president's veto power shapes the budget and policy bills, please?
Well, the biggest difference that you can see is, the difference between the U.S. government policy, which is set by the president, and of course, the Federal Reserve, which obviously controls the monetary policy. These two are, theoretically are supposed to balance each other out. And of course, let's not forget the role of Congress in setting budgets, and of course, the Senate.
Sir, in his State of the Union address, the president sets economic priorities. How does this annual speech influence the broader legislative agenda on economic matters?
This, of course, is probably one of the most anticipated topics of his discussion, is going to set the tone for his administration and set the tone for economic policy going forward, at least in the immediate term. We've heard a lot about potentially implementing tariffs on trading partners such as China and the EU. And of course, everybody around the world is waiting and anticipating what these policies will be like, and if there will be any tariffs that will be implemented, at least in the short term. So these are all things that are highly anticipated, and I think that everybody will be waiting to see what these policies are, because it will shape the direction of this coming administration.
Sir, these policies are not, of course, going to impact the United States and, of course, the decisions of of the U.S. President Donald Trump, as we all congratulate him, are not going to impact the United States alone, but, of course, globally.
Yeah, there'll be a global impact, especially if we remember in his last administration, Trump started the trade war with China because of what he perceived as unfair trade practices between China and the U.S. And as you know, China is the U.S.'s largest trading partner and vice versa. So both economies are highly dependent on each other. And when the trade war began, of course, we saw what the effects were on the Chinese economy, which of course we saw some deterioration in the export market for Chinese goods. But at the same time, the trade war did not last long, because both parties decided to come to terms. It was in the best interest of both economies. And I think that going forward, we'll see more of this rhetoric in terms of tariffs and trade wars going forward. But I think, as your previous guest mentioned, a lot of this is negotiation tactic, because
yes, and I mentioned, sir, that Donald Trump is a figure of negotiations.
Yes, that's correct. And what we anticipate we'll see is a lot of this rhetoric going forward, especially when we're talking about trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. But I don't think we will see full-blown trade wars, as some see as a worst-case scenario. I think a lot of the parties will decide to come to the table and negotiate terms that are favorable to both sides.
Okay, sir, the president appoints key figures such as members of the Federal Reserve Board and the Treasury Secretary. How does this power affect the direction of U.S. economic policy, especially at entities like the Federal Reserve, sir?
Well, of course, as you know, interest rates and the direction of interest rates not only affect the U.S. economy, but of course the global economy, as the dollar is the reserve currency. The incoming Trump administration, there's a lot of focus on the dollar and the direction of the dollar. And as we can see today, the dollar is at its highest rate within, I think, 2.5, 3 years. So this is all in anticipation of Trump's policies, which will be strong for the dollar, and economically it will be also favorable for the dollar. So when the president nominates the Treasury and nominates the Federal Reserve, both work hand in hand on monetary policies, which of course, as I mentioned, have strong impact on the global economy, especially when we're talking about global growth, inflation, interest rates, etc.
Okay, sir, in your view, and sir, sorry, because we have to wrap up this segment now. In your view, sir, how would you rate the overall economic influence of the United States president within the framework of checks and balances, especially compared to other global leaders with more centralized power?
As the world's largest economy and, of course, most influential in terms of, as I just mentioned, the dollar is the global currency of the world. It is, without a doubt, the most influential position when we're talking economic policy. And this is why it is highly anticipated what the incoming president, of course, second term for Donald Trump, will be like. Many of us already know what it will be like in terms of a repeat of the last term, but I think this time around, we will see even more policies that are favorable for the United States.
Sir, before I wrap up, and I have to wrap up now, you're optimistic or pessimistic about the ongoing, sir?
Over the short term, I am very optimistic. Long term, let's see what these policies do long
Okay,
term. But
sir.
short
Thank
term,
you
very
very much,
optimistic.
Dr. Tariq Rifai, for joining us, for your valuable and informative knowledge. Of course, you added a lot to our program today and to this historic day. Thank you very much for joining us, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. And dear viewers, with this we come to the end of this special coverage of the United States new President Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. We'll stay tuned for Q News. We're still here with you for more coverage till the inauguration ends. Don't go away.